I refused to pay for my daughter-in-law's $60,000 cruise because she tried to use my credit score to apply for a loan. In return, she slapped me and screamed, "Then find somewhere else to live." She threw my belongings onto the roadside while my son stood by, letting his wife do terrible things to me. He even added, "Why won't you sacrifice for your grandkids, Mom?" With nowhere to go, I walked away. 1 week later, I made the greedy ones pay dearly. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. My name is Agnes Reed. For 45 years, I was a city administrator, a wife, and a mother. I built my life on the solid bedrock of principle and fiscal responsibility. This is the story of how that bedrock was mistaken for a doormat, and how I summoned a flood to wash away the filth that had gathered at my door. Now let me tell you my story. My life had become a study in shrinkage. Not in a physical sense, though at 68 I was certainly more compact than I had been in my youth. No, the shrinkage was in the space I was allowed to occupy both physically and emotionally. After my dear husband, Charles, passed away 2 years ago, the silence in our modest but immaculate West Philly home became a deafening roar. My son Jamal and his wife Keisha had descended upon me with a cloud of performative concern. "You can't be here all alone, Mom," Jamal had said, his voice thick with a sincerity I now recognize as convenience. "It's too much for you to keep up with. Sell the house. Come live with us. We'll take care of you." It had sounded like a lifeline. I was drowning in grief, and they were offering me a place in their boat. So I sold the house, the place Charles and I had poured our souls into, and handed over a significant portion of the proceeds to them for an in-law suite renovation that turned out to be a finished basement with a hot plate and a mini fridge. I had become a tenant in my own life, paying rent with my presence. The daily friction was a low, constant hum beneath the surface of their chaotic lives. Keisha, a woman whose ambition vastly outstripped her work ethic, was an aspiring lifestyle influencer. This meant our small Philadelphia row house was a perpetual film set for a life of luxury we were not living. Mornings were a minefield. I would come upstairs from my basement dwelling to make a simple cup of tea, only to find the kitchen transformed. Ring lights would be perched on the counters, reflecting off the new, ridiculously expensive marble-patterned contact paper she had plastered over the perfectly good Formica. Keisha would be in a silk robe, bought for the video to be returned the next day, artfully arranging a single, sad-looking croissant on a plate, cooing into her phone about starting the day with Parisian vibes. My presence in my practical chenille robe was an unwelcome intrusion on her fantasy. "Agnes, could you please not be in the background?" she'd hiss, her smile never faltering for her phone's camera. "You're ruining the aesthetic." I would retreat to my basement, my tea unmade, feeling like a ghost in my own son's home. Jamal, when he was home from his long-haul trucking routes, was a ghost of a different sort. He was a man worn down to a nub by the road and by his wife's relentless demands. He'd collapse on the sofa, his eyes glazed over, a permanent exhaustion etched into the lines around his mouth. He saw the tension, the way Keisha's passive-aggressive remarks chipped away at me day after day. He heard her complain about my old-fashioned cooking or the way I folded the towels, all wrong. But to intervene would require energy he simply didn't have. His silence was his shield, but it was a shield that left me completely exposed. My only true joy in that house came in small, stolen moments with my grandsons Malik and Miles. They were 10-year-old twins, bright, boisterous boys with their father's kind eyes and, I feared, their mother's developing sense of entitlement. When Keisha was busy staging a luxury bubble bath scene in the upstairs bathroom, I would sneak the boys down to my basement suite. We'd play checkers, the worn red and black pieces a comforting weight in my hands. I'd tell them stories about their grandfather, about the city of Philadelphia when I was a girl, about a life built on hard work and integrity, not on likes and shares. They would listen, their eyes wide for a little while. But even these moments were often policed. Keisha would eventually track them down, her voice a sharp, saccharine intrusion. "Boys, what are you doing down here in the dark? Come on up. Mommy needs you to be in a video about our new organic gluten-free cookie tasting." She'd hustle them upstairs, leaving me in the sudden ringing silence. They were not just my grandsons, they were her props. And I was the inconvenient, off-brand stagehand who kept wandering into the shot. The air in the house was thick with unspoken things, resentment, disappointment, and the cloying, artificial scent of Keisha's latest sponsored candle. I was living in a diorama of a happy family, and I was beginning to forget what real happiness felt like. It was a Tuesday evening when Keisha decided to unveil her grand delusion. Jamal was home, a rare 2-day layover before he had to drive a shipment of produce to Chicago. We were eating dinner, a bland, flavorless chicken dish Keisha had gotten as a promotional meal kit, when she clapped her hands together with a theatrical flair that set my teeth on edge. "Hey family. Big announcement," she declared, pulling out her phone and immediately starting a live video. "I wanted to share this amazing news with all my followers first." Jamal chewed his chicken, his eyes already half closed with fatigue. The boys looked up from their iPads, their interest momentarily piqued. Keisha beamed into the camera. "You all know I've been working so hard to build our family brand, to create a life of inspiration and aspiration for you guys. Well, the universe has answered." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes wide. "I have been officially invited on the Global Influencer Getaway, an exclusive, invitation-only luxury cruise through the Greek Isles. It's a 7-day, all-inclusive journey with some of the biggest names in the lifestyle space." Her followers, a collection of bots and strangers, began to flood the comments with emojis of fire and champagne bottles. I picked at my chicken, a cold knot of dread forming in my stomach. I knew what was coming next. The price tag. "Now," she continued, her voice taking on a slightly more serious, businesslike tone, "this is, of course, a major investment in our future. It's not just a vacation. It's a networking opportunity that could change our lives. We're talking major brand partnerships, long-term sponsorships. This is the next level." Jamal, finally tuning in, sat up a little straighter. "How much of an investment are we talking about, Keisha?" he asked, his voice wary. Keisha waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about the details, babe. Think of the big picture. Think of what this means for the boys' future." She turned to Malik and Miles. "How would you guys like to go to the best private school in Philly? How would you like a trust fund for college? This cruise is the key." The boys, hearing the words trust fund, nodded enthusiastically, their eyes shining. He had them. She always knew how to get to them. I remained silent, my fork resting on my plate. I had spent 45 years as a city records administrator. I knew numbers. I knew budgets. I knew the precarious financial ground on which this family was built. Jamal's salary was decent, but Keisha's influencer career was a net loss, a constant churn of buying and returning clothes, gadgets, and home decor to maintain her fraudulent online persona. They were living paycheck to paycheck, a fact that was painfully obvious to me if not to her followers. "Keisha," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through her monologue. "How much does this investment cost?" She shot me an irritated look, annoyed that I had punctured her bubble of fantasy with something as vulgar as reality. She sighed dramatically. "It's $60,000, she said, the number dropping into the silence of the room like a stone. Jamal choked on a sip of water. $60,000? Baby, are you crazy? We don't have 60 cents, let alone $60,000. Keisha's smile tightened. She was losing her audience. "That's where the business part comes in," she said, her voice regaining its confident, syrupy tone. "Obviously we'll finance it. It's a business loan. The return on investment will be massive. But the bank, well, our debt-to-income ratio is a little tight right now because of all the investments I've been making in my brand." Her eyes, sharp and calculating, swiveled from her phone screen and landed directly on me. It was a look of pure, undisguised avarice. "But," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that was more poisonous than any venom, "the bank said that with a co-signer, someone with an impeccable long-standing credit history, the loan would be approved in a heartbeat." The entire table went silent. Jamal stared at his plate, refusing to meet my gaze. The boys looked from their mother to me, their expressions confused. Keisha held her pose, a brilliant, predatory smile plastered on her face, waiting for me to play my part in her grand, delusional scheme. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. In that moment I was no longer Agnes Reed, mother and grandmother. I was a number. An 810 credit score to be exact. And I had just become the most valuable commodity in the room. The silence that followed Keisha's pronouncement was a living thing. It was thick with expectation, heavy with the weight of her audacious demand. I could feel 3 sets of eyes on me, Keisha's sharp and demanding, Jamal's pleading and avoidant, and my grandson's curious and uncomprehending. In their faces, I saw the entire dysfunctional dynamic of our lives laid bare. Keisha, the entitled queen of her own fantasy kingdom. Jamal, her exhausted, enabling subject. And the boys, the innocent pawns in their mother's relentless game of make-believe. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, the cool liquid doing little to quench the fire of indignation that was beginning to burn in my chest. I had built my life on a foundation of quiet, unshakable principles. I paid my bills on time. I never spent more than I earned. I saved for a rainy day. My credit score wasn't just a number. It was a testament to a lifetime of discipline, of deferred gratification, of doing the right thing even when it was hard. It was the financial embodiment of my character. And Keisha was asking me to set it on fire to fuel her ridiculous ego-driven fantasy. I placed my glass down on the table with a soft, definitive click. I looked directly at Keisha, my gaze steady and unflinching. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap in the silent room. Keisha's brilliant smile faltered, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice losing its syrupy sweetness. "I said no, Keisha," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "I will not co-sign a $60,000 loan for a cruise. It is a catastrophically irresponsible financial decision, and I will not attach my name to it." The color began to rise in Keisha's cheeks. Her carefully constructed influencer persona was crumbling, revealing the raw, petulant fury beneath. "It's not a cruise," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's a business opportunity. Weren't you listening?" "I was listening very carefully," I replied, my tone still even. "I heard you say you want to borrow $60,000, at what I can only assume would be a cripplingly high interest rate, to go on a trip that has no guaranteed return on investment. You are asking me to risk my entire financial future, the security I have spent my entire life building, on a fantasy. The answer is no." Keisha's face twisted into a mask of ugly resentment. "I can't believe you," she shrieked, all pretense of a happy family live stream forgotten. "After everything we've done for you. We took you in. We give you a roof over your head. And you're going to sit there and sabotage my career? You're just a hater, Agnes. You've always been jealous of me, of my ambition." The accusation was so ludicrous it was almost laughable. Jealous? I was jealous of a woman who had to return half the things she owned to afford the other half? I was jealous of a life lived for the validation of strangers on the internet. But the laughter died in my throat when I saw Jamal. He was staring at me, his expression a mixture of shame and, to my horror, disappointment. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just think about it. It's for the boys. For their future." That was the moment my heart truly broke. He wasn't just enabling her, he believed her. He had drunk the Kool-Aid. He had allowed his wife to convince him that this reckless gamble was somehow a noble sacrifice for his children. "Sacrifice, Jamal?" I asked, my voice trembling with a hurt so profound it was a physical pain. "Your father and I sacrificed for 45 years. We sacrificed so we could own our own home. We sacrificed so you could go to college without a mountain of debt. We sacrificed so I could have a secure old age. What you are asking me to do is not sacrifice. It is suicide. And I will not do it." I pushed my chair back from the table, my appetite gone. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my dignity the only thing I had left. I walked out of the dining room, the sound of Keisha's enraged, sputtering insults following me down the stairs to my basement room. The door closed behind me, shutting out the noise, but it couldn't shut out the cold, hard truth. I wasn't just a tenant in their house. I was a resource. And my refusal to be exploited had just been interpreted as an act of war. A week of suffocating silence descended upon the house. It was a silence that was louder and more hostile than any argument. Keisha refused to speak to me, sweeping past me in the hallways with her nose in the air as if I were a bad smell. When she did acknowledge my existence, it was with a look of pure, venomous contempt. Jamal, for his part, had retreated into a shell of weary avoidance. He left for another long haul to the West Coast without so much as a goodbye, unable to look me in the eye. The only warmth came from the boys, who seemed confused by the sudden, icy atmosphere. They would sneak down to my room with comic books and whispered questions. "Is Mommy mad at you, Nana? Malik asked, his brow furrowed with a worry that no 10-year-old should have to carry. I would just smile and hug them, telling them that grown-ups were complicated. I didn't want to poison them against their own parents, no matter how much they deserved it. I spent most of my time in my room, reading and trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety in the pit of my stomach. I knew this wasn't over. Keisha was not the type of woman to accept defeat gracefully. She was a schemer, a manipulator. I just didn't know what her next move would be. The answer arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the disastrous dinner. The mail carrier, a friendly man named Frank who always had a kind word for me, handed me a small stack of letters. There were bills, junk mail, and one crisp white envelope that made my blood run cold. It was from a company I had never heard of, Apex High Risk Lending. It was addressed not to Jamal or Keisha, but directly to me, Agnes Reed. My hands trembled as I carried it down to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. With a sense of profound dread, I tore it open. The letter inside was a single page of dense, legalistic text. But the words leaped off the page, each one a separate, stinging blow. It was a formal notice. It stated that my application for a $60,000 personal loan had been preliminarily approved. All that was required to release the funds was a final voice verification, for which one of their agents would be calling me within the next 48 hours. I read the letter 3 times, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. A loan application. In my name. For $60,000. It was impossible. I hadn't applied for any loan. And then the horrifying, sickening realization crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just asked for my help. She had stolen my identity. She had taken my social security number, my date of birth, all the personal information she had access to by virtue of living under the same roof, and she had committed fraud. The blood drained from my face. I felt a wave of dizziness so intense I had to grip the edge of my mattress to keep from falling. This was a crime. A serious, life-altering crime. She had been willing to saddle me with a crippling debt, to destroy my perfect credit, to ruin the financial security I had so painstakingly built, all for a 7-day trip on a boat. The audacity of it, the sheer sociopathic selfishness, was beyond anything I could have imagined. The silence in my basement room was absolute. The only sound was the frantic, panicked beating of my own heart. The battle I thought I had won a week ago had just escalated into a full-blown war. And my enemy was not just a greedy, entitled woman. It was a criminal. The letter felt like a hot coal in my hand. The crisp, white paper was a tangible piece of her betrayal, a formal document outlining her contempt for me. For a long moment I just sat there, paralyzed by the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The woman who slept upstairs under the same roof as my grandchildren was not just manipulative and entitled. She was a felon. She had committed a crime against me, a crime that could unravel the entire fabric of my life. A cold, hard rage, unlike anything I had ever felt before, began to burn through the shock. It was a clean, purifying fire, incinerating the last vestiges of my patience, my tolerance, my misplaced sense of familial duty. I stood up, the letter clutched in my fist, and walked up the stairs. My steps were slow, deliberate, the steps of a woman on her way to a long-overdue execution. I found her where I knew I would, in the living room, surrounded by her ring lights, in the middle of filming another one of her pathetic charades. Today she was unboxing a designer handbag that was clearly a knockoff, gushing to her phone about its buttery soft leather and exquisite craftsmanship. She was wearing a new dress, probably also slated for return, and her face was a mask of practiced, joyful surprise. She didn't hear me approach. I stood there for a moment just watching her, this hollow woman performing for an audience of ghosts. The contrast between her fake, glittering world and the ugly, criminal reality I held in my hand was grotesque. "Keisha," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her monologue like a razor. She jumped, startled, a flash of annoyance crossing her face before she composed it back into a sweet, camera-ready smile. "Agnes, hi," she chirped, not missing a beat for her audience. "I was just showing my followers this gorgeous new bag. Isn't it to die for?" I walked forward and held up the letter. "I think you'd better end your video," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Something in my tone, some new hard edge she had never heard before, must have gotten through to her. Her smile faltered. She mumbled a hasty goodbye to her phone and ended the live stream. "What is your problem?" she snapped, the sweetness vanishing the instant the camera was off. "I was in the middle of something important." "This is important," I said, my voice shaking slightly with the force of my rage. "This came in the mail today. It's from a company called Apex High Risk Lending. It seems I've been approved for a $60,000 loan." Can you imagine my surprise? I watched her face. For a split second I saw a flicker of pure, animal panic in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of defiant, belligerent arrogance. She crossed her arms, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh that," she said, her tone dismissive. "I was going to tell you about it." "Were you?" I asked, my voice dripping with a sarcasm I didn't know I possessed. "Were you going to tell me that you stole my social security number? That you forged my signature on a loan application? That you committed multiple felonies in my name?" The cornered animal inside her finally came out, snarling and vicious. Her face contorted with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. "Stole?" she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I didn't steal anything. I borrowed it. You weren't going to help, so I helped myself. That perfect, precious credit score of yours is just sitting there collecting dust while my family's future is on the line. You are a selfish old woman, Agnes. You would rather hoard your money and your stupid numbers than see your own grandchildren succeed. My grandchildren's success has nothing to do with a $60,000 cruise for you." I shot back, my own voice rising to meet hers. "This was never about them. It was always about you, about your vanity, your greed, your pathetic need to pretend you are something you are not. You're a thief, Keisha. A common, vulgar thief." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and irrefutable. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. The last frayed thread of her self-control broke. Her eyes, which had been blazing with anger, went cold and flat. She took a step forward, her movements quick and reptilian. And then she slapped me. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack in the quiet room. Her hand, heavy with the cheap, oversized rings she wore, struck my cheek with a force that sent a burst of white-hot pain through my jaw. My head snapped to the side, and for a moment the world went silent and blurry. I stood there, stunned, my hand flying to my cheek, where the imprint of her fingers was already beginning to burn. I could taste the coppery tang of blood in my mouth where my teeth had cut the inside of my lip. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that I couldn't even process the pain. In all my 68 years, no one had ever raised a hand to me. The violation of it was more profound than the physical blow. It was an act of such utter, contemptuous disrespect that it shattered the last fragile remnants of any familial feeling I had left for her. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. The slap was a catalyst. It was as if the physical blow had broken a dam inside Keisha, unleashing a torrent of pure, undiluted venom. Her face, which had been a mask of rage, was now contorted into something truly ugly, a snarl of triumphant cruelty. She saw the shock and pain in my eyes and seemed to feed on it, to draw strength from my sudden vulnerability. "You see?" she hissed, her voice low and menacing, taking another step towards me. "You see what you made me do? This is your fault. You pushed me to this." The classic abuser's refrain. My fault. I had made her commit fraud. I had made her assault a senior citizen. The sheer, twisted logic of it was breathtaking. But before I could even form a response, her voice rose again, escalating into a full-blown, screaming tirade that echoed through the small house. "You live under my roof, you old hag," she shrieked, her finger jabbing the air just inches from my face. "You eat my food. You take up space in my house. The least you could do is show a little gratitude. But you can't even do that. If you're not with us, you're against us. And I will not have an enemy living in my home." Her eyes, wild and manic, darted around the living room, landing on the small framed photograph of my late husband that I kept on the end table. With a guttural cry of rage, she lunged for it, swept it off the table and hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered, the sound a sharp, painful punctuation to her rampage. The sight of Charles's smiling face, now lying amidst a spiderweb of broken glass, was the final, unforgivable desecration. That was the moment the last of my love for my son's family died. It withered and turned to ash in the face of such senseless, vicious hatred. Keisha's frenzy was escalating. "You want to be useless?" she screamed. "Fine. Then be useless somewhere else. Find somewhere else to live. She ran to the top of the basement stairs and bellowed down into my small apartment. You're out. Do you hear me? Out. She then began a manic, terrifying purge. She stormed into the kitchen, grabbed a handful of black trash bags from under the sink, and descended into my basement. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, listening to the sounds of my life being destroyed. I heard the crash of a lamp, the ripping of fabric, the brutal, indiscriminate sounds of her stuffing my carefully kept belongings into the cheap plastic bags. My clothes, my books, the Afghan my own mother had knitted for me, all of it was being treated like garbage. And then the front door opened. It was Jamal. He was home early, a rare and in this case tragic occurrence. He stepped into the hallway, his face etched with the familiar weariness of the road, and stopped dead, his eyes taking in the scene of utter chaos. He saw the shattered picture frame on the floor. He saw the fury on his wife's face. And he saw me standing by the stairs, my hand still pressed to my stinging, swelling cheek, my eyes wide with a horror that was beyond words. For a single fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of shock and concern in his eyes. Hope, that stubborn, foolish weed, sprouted in my chest. He would stop this. He would see what his wife had become, what she had done, and he would finally stand up for his mother. I took a step towards him, my hand outstretched, my voice a broken plea. Jamal, I whispered. She hit me. He looked at my cheek. He looked at his wife, who had emerged from the basement, her chest heaving, a trash bag clutched in her fist. He looked back at me. And in that moment I watched my son make a choice. I watched him weigh the lifetime of love and care I had given him against the volatile, demanding presence of the woman who now controlled his life. And I watched him choose her. His eyes, which had for a second held a spark of his old self, went dull and flat. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze, his shoulders slumping in a gesture of utter, complete surrender. Mom, he said, his voice so low I could barely hear it. She's just trying to secure our future. The cruise. It was for the boys. He finally looked at me, his eyes not angry but filled with a weary, pathetic resignation that was somehow worse. And then he delivered the line that would echo in my heart forever, the words that severed the final thread of our bond. Why won't you sacrifice for your grandkids, Mom? Sacrifice. He used that word. He stood there, looking at his mother who had just been assaulted by his wife over an act of fraud, and he asked me why I wouldn't sacrifice more. The question was so profoundly, monstrously selfish that it defied all reason. I had sacrificed my home. I had sacrificed my savings. I had sacrificed my peace of mind. And now he was asking me to sacrifice my dignity and my financial solvency on the altar of his wife's greed. I had no words left. There was nothing to say. I just stared at him, at this stranger wearing my son's face. And I watched. I watched as Keisha, emboldened by her husband's cowardice, began to haul the trash bags up from the basement. One by one she dragged them across the living room floor, her face flushed with triumphant exertion. Jamal didn't help her, but he didn't stop her either. He just stood there, a silent, complicit statue, as his wife threw his mother's life out onto the street. She shoved the final bag out the front door, where it joined the others in a sad black pile on the rain-slicked Philadelphia sidewalk. Then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with a victor's cruel light. Get out, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. And don't even think about coming back. I looked at my son one last time, searching for any sign of the boy I had raised. There was nothing. Just a hollowed-out man who had traded his conscience for a quiet life. I turned, and with a dignity I didn't know I possessed, I walked out of the house that was no longer my home, into the cold, drizzling rain. The front door clicked shut behind me with a sound of chilling finality. I stood on the narrow sidewalk, the cold, persistent drizzle soaking through my thin cardigan, plastering my hair to my scalp. The world had suddenly shrunk to this small, miserable patch of concrete, surrounded by a pathetic, lumpy pile of black trash bags that contained the sum total of my 68 years. The physical pain in my cheek was a dull, throbbing ache, a constant, humiliating reminder of the violence that had just occurred. But it was nothing compared to the emotional pain, a vast, hollow cavern that had opened up in my chest. It was the pain of betrayal so absolute and profound that it felt like a physical death. My son. My only child. He had watched. He had stood by, a silent, willing accomplice as his wife assaulted me and threw me out like garbage. His question, "Why won't you sacrifice?" echoed in my mind, each word a fresh, twisting turn of the knife. He had redefined the very meaning of the word, turning a mother's love into a transactional commodity to be leveraged and exploited. I had no destination, no plan. My mind, which had been so sharp and clear in its anger just moments before, was now a thick, numb fog. I looked up and down the familiar street, the neat rows of brick houses, the trees just beginning to show the first blush of autumn color. It was a street I had known for years, but it suddenly felt alien, hostile. The windows of the neighboring houses were dark, blank eyes, offering no witness, no comfort. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stand on this sidewalk, a spectacle of shame for all to see. I started to walk. I had no idea where I was going. My feet just moved, one in front of the other, carrying me away from the scene of my own destruction. The rain began to fall harder, a steady, miserable downpour that matched the tears I couldn't shed. My sensible shoes, the ones I always wore for their comfort and support, were quickly soaked, my socks cold and clammy against my skin. The trash bags with their precious, desecrated contents were left behind. I didn't even look back. What was in them? Clothes? Books? Photographs? They were just things, and things could be replaced. What had been taken from me, my home, my family, my sense of safety in the world, was irreplaceable. I walked for hours. The city of Philadelphia, my city, a place I had always loved for its grit and its history, became a blur of wet asphalt, glaring headlights and indifferent faces. I wandered through neighborhoods I knew, past parks where I had pushed my son on the swings, past the library where I had first taught him to love books. Every landmark was a fresh source of pain, a reminder of a life that was now a lie. The fog in my mind began to clear, replaced by waves of cold, hard reality. I had no house. I had no key. The money from the sale of my home was in a joint account with Jamal, an account I now realized I would likely never be able to access. I had the clothes on my back, a few dollars in my purse, and a credit card that I was sure Keisha would have already tried to max out. I was, for all intents and purposes, homeless. The thought was so terrifying that it momentarily stopped me in my tracks. Agnes Reed, a woman who had worked her entire life, who had done everything right, was standing on a street corner in the pouring rain with nowhere to go. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. I found myself in front of a 24-hour diner, its neon sign a cheerful, garish beacon in the gloomy twilight. The windows were steamy, offering a glimpse of a warm, bright world inside. On impulse, I pushed the door open and stumbled in, the bell above the door announcing my pathetic arrival with a cheerful jingle. I slid into a booth in the back corner, the cracked red vinyl a small, anonymous comfort. A waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, brought me a cup of coffee without me even having to ask. I wrapped my cold, trembling hands around the warm ceramic mug, the heat a small, welcome anchor in the storm of my despair. I sat there for a long time, watching the rain streak down the window pane, the coffee growing cold in my hands. The numbness was beginning to wear off, replaced by a deep, bone-chilling fear. What was I going to do? Where was I going to go? And then, through the fog of my fear and grief, a single clear thought emerged. A name. Denise. My younger sister. My fierce, no-nonsense, fiercely loyal baby sister. Why hadn't I thought of her sooner? In the chaos and the trauma, I had forgotten that I was not entirely alone in the world. I still had family. Real family. With a surge of renewed hope, I pulled my phone out of my purse, my fingers fumbling with the wet screen. I found her number and pressed the call button, praying she would answer. She picked up on the second ring. Agnes? Is that you? It's late. Is everything okay? Her voice, so familiar and strong, was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. And then the dam inside me finally broke. The tears I had been unable to shed finally came, a torrent of grief and shame and rage. Denise, I sobbed, my voice a broken, unrecognizable croak. I need you. Denise arrived at the diner less than an hour later, a whirlwind of purpose and controlled fury. She found me huddled in the back booth, still wrapped in my damp cardigan, my face blotchy and swollen from crying. She didn't ask questions, not at first. She simply slid into the booth opposite me, took one look at my face, and her expression hardened into a mask of grim determination. She ordered me a bowl of soup and a grilled cheese sandwich and sat in silence while I ate, her presence a warm, protective shield. When I had finished and the food had brought a small measure of strength back to my trembling body, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it held the sharp, incisive edge of the paralegal she had been for 35 years. "Okay, Aggie," she said, using her childhood nickname for me. "Start from the beginning. And don't leave out a single detail." And so, the story came pouring out of me, a torrent of ugly, painful truths. I told her about the constant disrespect, the financial strain, the influencer fantasies. I told her about the demand for the loan, my refusal, and the fraudulent application letter. And then, my voice dropping to a choked whisper, I told her about the slap, the shattered photograph, and the final soul-crushing betrayal of my son. As I spoke, I watched a transformation occur in my sister's face. The initial shock and concern in her eyes slowly cooled, solidifying into something as hard and unyielding as granite. Her expression became a study in cold, methodical fury. This was not just a family drama to her. This was a case. She was listening not just as a sister but as a legal professional, and in her mind I could see her cataloging the offenses, building a brief against the people who had hurt me. When I finally fell silent, my story told, she didn't offer empty platitudes or comforting hugs. She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and steady. "Okay," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Here's what they did. 1. Identity theft, a federal offense. 2. Loan fraud, also a federal offense. 3. Assault and battery, a criminal offense in the state of Pennsylvania. 4. Illegal eviction. He may be your son, but you were a tenant in that house and they had no legal right to throw you out without due process." She ticked each point off on her fingers, her mind already assembling the legal framework for what was to come. The pity in her eyes had been replaced by a righteous, chilling anger that was more comforting to me than any expression of sympathy could have been. She wasn't just validating my pain, she was weaponizing it. "We're not going to cry about this, Aggie," she said, her gaze locking with mine. "We're going to act. They wanted a sacrifice? Fine. We'll give them one. We are going to sacrifice them on the altar of the justice system." She paid the bill, leaving a generous tip for the kind waitress, and then helped me to my feet. "You're coming home with me," she said, her arm a firm, protective band around my shoulders. "You're going to have a hot bath, a glass of wine, and you're going to sleep in a safe, clean bed. And tomorrow we are going to start dismantling your son's life." As she led me out of the diner and into the cool, clean air of her car, I felt a flicker of something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. It was a different kind of hope than the one I had clung to for years. It wasn't the soft, pleading hope that my family would love me. It was a hard, sharp, righteous hope. The hope for justice. The hope for retribution. My aimless, desperate walk through the storm had finally led me to a safe harbor. And from this harbor I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were about to launch a counterattack that would sink them all. The drive to Denise's house in the suburbs was a blur. I was exhausted emotionally and physically, but my mind was racing. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't just reacting to the chaos created by Jamal and Keisha. I was on the offensive. Denise's home was everything my son's house was not. It was a modest but immaculate twin in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Inside, everything was orderly, peaceful, and calm. There were no ring lights, no piles of unopened packages, no sense of frantic, staged perfection. There were just books, comfortable furniture, and the quiet, soothing hum of a life lived with intention and self-respect. Denise ran me a hot bath, gave me a soft, clean nightgown to wear, and poured me a glass of red wine that was smoother and richer than anything Keisha had ever pretended to enjoy on her live streams. I sank into the guest bed, the sheets crisp and cool against my skin, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity I felt safe. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. I came downstairs to find Denise sitting at her dining room table, which was covered not with breakfast, but with a neat array of legal pads and pens. She had already been up for hours, her sharp paralegal mind outlining a strategy. She slid a cup of coffee towards me. "Sleep okay?" she asked. I nodded, feeling more clear-headed than I had in years. "Good," she said, her tone brisk and all business. "Because today we go to war. Now first things first. We need to understand our assets. What exactly is the situation with the money from your house? I took a deep breath. It was time to reveal the one secret I had managed to keep, the one piece of myself I had not allowed them to touch. When I sold the house, I began, the proceeds were about $300,000. I gave Jamal and Keisha $100,000 for the renovation, and for helping me out. Denise snorted in derision but let me continue. The remaining $200,000, I told them I put it into a conservative annuity, something that would pay out a small monthly stipend for the rest of my life. I made it sound like it was basically gone, tied up and inaccessible. Denise looked at me, her eyes narrowing with dawning comprehension. You told them that, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. But that's not what you actually did, is it, Aggie? I shook my head, a matching smile touching my own lips for the first time. No, I said. That money, the entire $200,000, is sitting in a high-yield savings account at a completely different bank, an account that is in my name and my name alone. They have no idea it exists. The look on my sister's face was pure, unadulterated joy. It was the look of a chess player who has just been handed a queen. She slapped the table with a loud, triumphant crack. Agnes Reed, you magnificent, sneaky woman, she crowed. This changes everything. This isn't just a shield, it's a sword. A big, sharp $200,000 sword. The revelation of my secret nest egg transformed the entire dynamic of our planning session. We were no longer just seeking justice. We were in a position of immense power. Denise's legal mind went into overdrive, her pen flying across the legal pad as she mapped out a new, far more devastating strategy. Okay, she said, her voice electric with a new energy. Forget just defending yourself. We are going on the attack. This is no longer about getting you back on your feet. This is about burning their entire corrupt little kingdom to the ground. The plan she outlined was a thing of brutal, beautiful simplicity. It was a two-pronged counterattack designed to hit them where they were most vulnerable, their finances and their fraudulent public image. Prong one is legal, she explained, her finger tapping the first legal pad. Tomorrow morning you and I are going to the police station. You are going to file a formal, detailed police report. You will report the assault and battery, complete with the date, the time, and a description of the physical blow. You will report the identity theft and the loan fraud, and you will submit that letter from Apex Lending as Exhibit A. We are not going to threaten them with this, Aggie. We are going to do it. We are going to set the wheels of the criminal justice system in motion. The thought of involving the police, of filing a report against my own son's wife, made my stomach churn with a lifetime of ingrained family loyalty. But then I thought of the sting of her hand on my cheek, the sound of my husband's picture frame shattering, and the dead, empty look in my son's eyes. That family was already gone. Okay, I said, my voice firm. We do it. Good, Denise said, a grimly satisfied nod. Now for prong two. The financial attack. This is where it gets fun. She pulled another legal pad towards her. You said Keisha is obsessed with her image, with climbing the social ladder, right? She wants to be a big-shot influencer, living a life of luxury. I nodded. Well, Denise said, a predatory glint in her eyes. What is the ultimate symbol of that life for people like her? A big new house, I said, the pieces starting to click into place in my own mind. Exactly, Denise confirmed. A dream house. And I'm willing to bet my pension that now that they think they have the house to themselves, and now that they think they have access to your joint account, they are out there right now looking for that dream house. It was a chilling but entirely plausible thought. They would see me as a problem that had been solved, an obstacle removed. They would waste no time in leveraging their newfound freedom. So, Denise continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, here's what we're going to do. We are going to find out what house they're trying to buy. And then you, my dear, clever, secretly wealthy sister, are going to buy it right out from under them. The sheer audacious brilliance of the plan took my breath away. It was a move of such breathtaking, poetic justice that I could only stare at her in awe. It was a plan that would not only leave them financially ruined, but would also deliver a public, humiliating blow to the very core of Keisha's fraudulent, image-obsessed identity. It was perfect. We spent the rest of the day planning, our quiet suburban dining room transformed into a war room. We made a list of the top real estate agents in the most desirable suburbs. We contacted my bank and arranged for the wire transfer of a large sum of money into a new checking account. We prepared a written statement for the police. With every step we took, I felt myself changing. The weak, victimized woman who had stumbled into the diner 2 nights ago was gone. In her place was a woman of means, of strategy, of power. I was no longer Agnes Reed, the discarded mother. I was Agnes Reed, the architect of a reckoning. The next morning, Denise and I walked into the local police precinct. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, a stark institutional contrast to the manicured world Keisha inhabited. I felt a tremor of fear, a lifetime of being a law-abiding citizen making me feel out of place and exposed. But Denise walked with an easy confidence, her paralegal background making her immune to the intimidation of the setting. She guided me to the front desk, her presence a shield of calm authority. We were led to a small, sterile interview room, where we met with a detective named Harris, a middle-aged man with kind, tired eyes that had clearly seen the worst of human behavior. I had expected skepticism, perhaps even a dismissive attitude towards what he might perceive as a mere family squabble. But as I told my story, my voice steady and clear, guided by the concise, fact-based statement Denise had helped me prepare, I saw his expression shift from professional detachment to one of genuine concern and then to a quiet, simmering anger. I presented him with the letter from Apex Lending. I showed him the raw, ugly bruise that was now blooming on my cheek, a visible testament to Keisha's violence. I gave him the names, the dates, the details. I was no longer a victim recounting a trauma. I was a witness providing testimony. When I was finished, Detective Harris looked at me for a long moment, his gaze filled with a weary empathy. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I am very sorry for what you have been through. What you have described is not a family squabble. It is a series of criminal acts. Identity theft, loan fraud, and assault are serious charges." He took the letter, placing it carefully into an evidence bag. "I will be opening an official investigation immediately. We will subpoena the full loan application from the lender. We will check security footage from your bank. And you can expect a visit from one of my officers to your son's residence in the very near future." The words "official investigation" were a turning point. This was no longer my word against hers. The weight of the law was now on my side. As we walked out of the precinct and into the bright morning sun, I felt a profound sense of relief. The first shot in our war had been fired and it had been a direct hit. The rest of the day was dedicated to the second prong of our attack, the Dream House Gambit. Denise, with her network of legal and real estate contacts, was a force of nature. She made a few discreet calls and by lunchtime we had our answer. A contact at a title company confirmed that a mortgage application was being processed for Jamal and Keisha Reed. They had, just as Denise predicted, made an offer on a house. It was a sprawling, new construction McMansion in a wealthy suburb, a house so far beyond their means it was laughable. It was the ultimate prop for Keisha's influencer fantasies, a palace of beige stucco and empty aspirations. They had put down a small, non-refundable deposit and were scrambling to get the financing approved, a process that was almost certainly contingent on them draining the joint account I shared with Jamal. "They're overextended, arrogant, and moving too fast," Denise said, a grim smile on her face. "It's the perfect trap." She contacted a high-end real estate agent, a sharp, discreet woman she had worked with before, and explained the situation. The agent, smelling a quick, clean, all-cash commission, was more than happy to help. That afternoon, I sat in a sterile conference room at the real estate agent's office and signed the papers. Using the funds from my secret savings, I made an all-cash offer on the house. It was 10% above the asking price, a number so compelling that no seller in their right mind would refuse it. We included a single contingency. The offer was only valid for 24 hours. We were not just buying a house, we were lighting a fuse. The agent submitted the offer. And then we waited. The next 24 hours were some of the longest of my life. I paced the floor of Denise's living room, my mind a whirlwind of anxiety and anticipation. What if it didn't work? What if they got their financing approved first? What if the sellers were loyal to their first offer? Denise, ever the calm strategist, simply made us tea and put on a jazz record. "Patience, Aggie," she said. "The greed of others is the most reliable force in the universe. They'll take the cash." He was right. The call came the next afternoon. The sellers had accepted my offer. The house was mine. I had just bought my son and daughter-in-law's dream right out from under them. The feeling was not one of simple joy or triumph. It was something more complex, more profound. It was the feeling of a balance being restored, of a great and terrible injustice finally being answered. The stage was now set for the final act. All the pieces were in place. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on their ruin. The implosion, when it came, was swift and spectacular. I imagine it happened on a Thursday afternoon. Keisha would have been in high spirits, her dream house so close she could almost taste it. She would have been scrolling through high-end furniture websites, planning the decor for her new content creation studio. Jamal would have been on the phone with the mortgage broker, trying to smooth over the last-minute details, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. The first call would have come from their real estate agent. The tone would have been apologetic but firm. The sellers had received an all-cash offer, significantly above asking price. The deal was done. Their offer was dead. They had lost the house. The shock and fury from that call would have still been echoing in the room when the second blow landed. A knock on the door. Not a friendly neighborhood knock but a hard, official rap of authority. Jamal would have opened it to find 2 uniformed police officers and a plain-clothed detective on his doorstep. Detective Harris. He would have asked for Keisha by name. He would have informed them in the cold, dispassionate language of the law that he was there to investigate a formal complaint of identity theft, loan fraud, and assault. And then he would have delivered the final, devastating blow. He would have told them the name of the complainant, Agnes Reed. I can picture the scene with perfect, satisfying clarity. The blood draining from Keisha's face, her mask of arrogant defiance finally shattering into a million pieces of raw, animal fear. The look of utter, slack-jawed disbelief on Jamal's face as his 2 worlds, the one where he placated his wife and the one where he neglected his mother, collided with catastrophic force. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect, aspirational life would have crumbled to dust in that single, terrible moment. Their dream house was gone. Their financial future was in jeopardy. And now the law was at their door. It was a perfect, inescapable storm of their own making. While their world was collapsing, mine was being rebuilt. The day after I closed on their dream house, I put it right back on the market. In the hot suburban real estate market, it sold in less a week, and thanks to my cash offer leverage, I made a tidy $20,000 profit on the transaction. It was the easiest money I had ever made, a small, sweet bonus for a job well done. With my finances more secure than ever, I set about building my new life. I found a beautiful, sun-filled condominium in a quiet, well-maintained building in a different part of the city. It had a balcony overlooking a park, a modern kitchen, and most importantly, a lock on the door to which only I had the key. I filled it not with the heavy, memory-laden furniture of my past, but with new things, pieces that I chose for myself, that reflected the woman I was becoming. Strong, independent, and free. My most important task, however, concerned my grandsons. My heart ached for Malik and Miles, 2 innocent boys caught in the crossfire of their parents' greed and stupidity. I knew their future, in the hands of Jamal and Keisha, was precarious at best. I would not let them be the final victims of this tragedy. I met with my lawyer, Arthur Vance, and we set up 2 ironclad, irrevocable educational trust funds, 1 for each boy. The funds were substantial, enough to pay for their entire college education from tuition to living expenses. But the terms were strict. The money could only be used for accredited educational institutions. It could not be touched by their parents for any reason. And it would be managed by an independent trustee, my sister Denise, until each boy turned 21. It was my final act of sacrifice for them, but this time it was a sacrifice on my own terms. It was not a capitulation to greed, but an investment in their future, a legacy of integrity that would, I hoped, counteract the poisonous example set by their parents. I was ensuring that they would have a chance to build their own lives, free from the chaos and instability that was sure to follow their parents' downfall. I was giving them the one thing Keisha and Jamal had tried to take from me, a secure future. The aftermath for Jamal and Keisha was as grim as I had anticipated. Keisha, facing multiple felony charges, was forced to hire an expensive lawyer, draining the last of their savings. Her social media presence vanished overnight, her brand destroyed by the ugly reality of her criminal behavior. Jamal, implicated in the loan fraud and with his own credit now in ruins, lost his contract with the trucking company. They were forced to sell their row house to cover their mounting legal fees and moved into a cramped, run-down apartment on the other side of town. Their dream of a luxury lifestyle had ended in a nightmare of their own making. I did not gloat. I took no joy in their suffering. I simply observed it from a distance with the cool, detached satisfaction of a job well done. They had sown the wind and they had reaped the whirlwind. My life, in contrast, was a study in peace. I spent my days reading, gardening on my new balcony, and exploring the city I loved. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I volunteered at the local library, reading stories to children, their bright, innocent faces a welcome balm to my soul. My relationship with my grandsons was tentative at first. Jamal, humbled and broken, would bring them to visit me in the park, a neutral ground where the ghosts of the past were less intrusive. We didn't talk about their parents' situation. We talked about school, about superheroes, about the simple, important things in a 10-year-old's life. I let them see that their grandmother's love was a constant, a steady, reliable thing, even when the world around them was falling apart. One afternoon as we were leaving the park, Malik, the quieter of the two, took my hand. "I'm glad you didn't buy Mommy the boat, Nana," he said, his voice small but clear. "She was real mean to you." In that moment I knew that I had done the right thing. I had not just saved myself. I had given my grandsons a chance to learn the difference between a life of substance and a life of performance. I had taught them the true meaning of sacrifice. It wasn't about funding a fantasy. It was about having the courage to stand up for what is right no matter the cost. My life was smaller now, in a way. I lived in a condo, not a house. My family was fractured. But in the quiet, peaceful space I had carved out for myself, I had found something I hadn't realized I was missing: my own unshakable worth. Now I'm curious about you who have listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to reclaim your own peace? Comment below.